Hello, Oliver here again. Today I'll be talking about the recent bans that happened in Standard, Pioneer, and Historic. I don't really play Brawl, so I won't talk about that. So for Standard, Wreck and Growth Spiral got banned. It's pretty obvious. Wreck has been dominating for a while now. It's made Standard pretty unplayable while it was legal. Like, the only reason people were playing it mainly was to practice for tournaments. No one was really playing Standard for fun during that period. And then, in addition to that, Teferi and Cauldron Familiar got banned. I personally think Teferi was fine on a power level basis for Standard, but I think the main reason he got banned was it was just really unfun to play against. A lot of people were disenfranchised from Standard because it kind of breaks the traditional rules of Magic. A lot of people like playing at instant speed, obviously, and Teferi just denies that. Plus the whole pattern of getting your creatures bounced and other permanents invalidated because of Teferi makes him not the most fun card. So I feel like Teferi was mainly banned on a fun level, which is an interesting precedent that Wizards is setting, where they're saying that they're willing to ban cards that may not be problematic from a win percentage perspective, but they could ban them just because people aren't having fun against them. And I really like the Cauldron Familiar ban because with these other three cards getting banned, the last like tier 1 deck that would be remaining in Standard would be the Mayhem Devil Cat Oven decks, which I feel like would dominate if just these other three cards were banned, because their main weakness was to more spell-based decks like Wreck and Dance Ramp, while they beat up the creature decks. And then in this new Standard format, I would expect there to be many more creature decks. So I feel like those sacrifice decks would dominate in that format. So nerfing them makes a lot of sense. But one thing is, I feel like Wizards maybe should have banned a card in the Adventures deck, because that's another deck that has a really high power level, lots of synergy, but is completely untouched here. And the main reason it wasn't seeing much play before was it's pretty bad against Wreck and the Sacrifice decks, but both of those decks are banned, meaning that there's not really any natural predators for that deck remaining. So we'll see how the Standard progresses, but I would keep my eye open for Adventures. I think that's going to be a really strong deck going forward. Alright, going on to Pioneer. So, also similar to the Teferi ban, Inverter and Walking Ballista were banned, despite Wizards previously saying that they wouldn't ban those cards because their win rates weren't problematic. But I think a large reason that Pioneer has been much less popular recently was because people just don't have fun playing against these pretty linear combo decks, and a lot of people just don't think that's what Pioneer should be about. So it's kind of similar to Teferi ban, as in apparently these cards weren't too strong for the format, but people were just not having a good time playing against them, so Wizards decided to ban those cards so people would start exploring the format again, rather than just letting them be stale and underplayed. So those two bans make sense. Walking Ballista obviously combos with the Heliod card, which is a really strong combo, and Inverter combos with Thassa's Oracle or Jace, which was like the tier 1 deck of Pioneer for basically as long as I can remember. And then Kethis got banned, which makes sense. It's another linear combo deck, but it also recently got a lot better because they unbanned Oath and Nissa. So I think this ban is smart. Kethis may have not been too popular beforehand, but it would definitely be a problematic card with these other cards banned. So I think that was a good ban on their end. And then Underworld's Breach, another combo card, makes sense based on the precedent they're setting by banning these other three cards. So I think all those Pioneer bans are very smart and should make a lot more people interested in the format again, which would be good for Pioneer and Wizards. And then in Historic, Wreck got suspended. I think that makes a lot of sense, similar to in Standard. Wreck was just the clear best deck and was kind of invalidating a lot of different decks, and was also making the format way less fun because you just play against Wreck, which is a really overpowered and I mean, it's an interactive card because the other support cards are pretty interactive, but you know, it's interactive in quotes because just getting all your creatures killed and your spells countered, then them just drawing a million cards with expansion explosion doesn't really feel like healthy interaction. So that makes sense. Teferi I found pretty interesting. I think actually Teferi was not even that good in Historic. It was just played in every blue-white deck, because why not play it? But it's not like it's a dominant card or anything. There's not really like many flash decks or control decks in Historic for Teferi to really shine against. It was more just like a card at a good rate. But I think similar to what I said in Standard, people just don't have a good time playing against Teferi, and I feel like Wizards just wants to move forward without that card and not having to worry about it in the future, which makes sense. But one card that I feel like they overlooked was Fields of the Dead. I know a lot of people think, Fields of the Dead isn't even that good in Historic, but the thing is, Fields of the Dead is just a really problematic card to leave legal. Because as we saw in the previous Historic format now, with Wreck and Fields of the Dead, the deck could just attack from a lot of angles, and the Fields made the deck a lot better than it is in its standard version, because Field just lets you pressure planeswalkers and eventually win the game even without Wreck. And the thing is, the opportunity cost of playing Fields in these decks is so low, because you just want to play a bunch of different lands anyways in these like super land heavy multicolored decks, and then playing Field just makes you play slightly different lands, but it doesn't really come at a huge cost, and it just boosts your power level so much. So I think by leaving Field legal, that opens up the opportunity for future problematic decks that feature Fields at a very low cost. They just need to be like slower 3 or 4 color decks, and then they could just support Fields pretty easily. So I'm kind of surprised to not see that suspended, but I don't know. I would predict that it will be suspended sometime in the future. And yeah, that's what I think about these bans. Thought they're pretty good overall, and looking forward to play these new formats without these cards. Thanks for watching.